CEO of the Minneapolis Downtown Council and Downtown Improvement District. Really appreciate you taking a little bit of time over your noon hour to tune in to learn a little bit about experiences in downtowns across the country. And I'm going to introduce our truly outstanding panelists here just in a moment. But I thought I might start by just reflecting a little bit on what's been going on around here and look forward to some of the planning work that we'll be doing, that we're talking about with our panelists. I was saying earlier to as we were visiting before this started that we were coming up on a pretty exciting weekend in Minneapolis in downtown. We've got our Taylor Swift concerts and they're heading towards Denver, so I can give Courtney a rundown on how that goes, which happens to overlay with our Pride weekend and a big Kiwanis convention and all the normal things that are going on downtown, theater and music. So we expect maybe 500,000 people downtown this weekend, which is our biggest weekend certainly for many years. We also have a number of new initiatives underway, and we'll hear about some of the things that are going on in our the cities that are joining the call today as well. But a lot of activations focused on Nicollet and downtown, a new strategy working with the city on storefront activation, a lot of office to residential work going on, a project in the ground now, and several buildings have been acquired with that purpose in mind. A great event last week where Prudential Insurance brought their suburban workforce into a downtown office, and their workers seemed to be happy as they could be. So a lot of positive things going on. But also over the weekend, you probably noticed we had our version, and I bet the other cities have had theirs as well, of the front page article, Downtown Isn't Dead Yet, and kind of going through all of the challenges that we know downtowns across the country, including ours, are facing. I was mentioning we had our visit by Attorney General Garland to talk about the DOJ findings in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. So plenty of challenges as well. And I think that kind of juxtaposition of good news, challenging news just sort of typifies these last 3 years that cities all over the country have been through, but we persevere and we keep moving forward. And for us, that means beginning to look out towards 2035 for our next kind of downtown strategic plan. And that work is beginning. We have our kickoff scheduled for July 12th. We're beginning to form the committees, the leadership groups, solidify the process. So that work will kick off very, very soon. Which brings us really to today and our goal of hearing from three cities that we very much sometimes emulate, sometimes sympathize with, sometimes get jealous of, but always respect the work that's going on in these three communities. And so again, I couldn't be more grateful for the leaders of the downtown organizations in Denver, Portland, and Indianapolis for joining us today. So let me introduce them. Courtney Garrett is the president and CEO of the Downtown Denver Partnership. Andrew Hone is the president and CEO of the Portland Business Alliance. And Taylor Schaefer is the president and CEO of Downtown Indy. And again, thank you all for joining us. And where we thought we would start is just to ask each of them to take 5 or 7 minutes and tell us a little about kind of the journey that their community has been on, and what it's been like, what are the challenges, what's exciting, and kind of what's in store here. And then we'll shift in the next round of questions a little bit to that forward-looking planning process. But let's just start with getting a level set. And Courtney, if you'd be willing to start us off by telling us what's going on in Denver, that'd be great. Other than congratulations on the championship, and we still believe in Minneapolis that the Timberwolves gave you guys the best series in the playoffs. I don't know if it's true or not.
Well, thank you for leading with that, because it has been incredible. And I do just thank you for this opportunity. Any chance I have to be with colleagues, and as you said, either share our envy, share our challenge, whatever the case may be. We actually just saw a presentation this morning from one of our folks who was in Minneapolis for the Operations and Placemaking Conference for the International Downtown Association. So he had a lot of great lessons learned, and we actually had a contingent in Indianapolis not too long ago looking at the cultural trail. So we're always learning from one another. So I'm thrilled to be here. Courtney Garrett, I'm the president and CEO here at the Downtown Denver Partnership. For those of you who I know have been in the industry with for quite some time, I was in Dallas immediately prior to coming here. I've been in this position in Denver for a year and a half. In Dallas, as I was with their downtown organization for 20 years and ran it for the last 7. So I can kind of toggle a couple of different perspectives. perspectives if the conversation lends itself. But of course, I'll focus on my hometown here, which is Denver, Colorado. I think in terms of the journey of our downtown over the last 3 years, you look at where Denver was pre-pandemic, 35,000 residents in the core of downtown, 100,000 in what I think many downtowns we define as kind of our greater city center. So including those neighborhoods that are well connected, 100,000 employees, thriving retail, top 5 talent attraction. Really, the market momentum had been at Denver's back for the last 20 years. Even when I was in Dallas, I brought our now outgoing Mayor Hancock into my annual meeting and said, tell everyone, this was 2016, tell everyone what Denver did right. We want to learn from you. So really just a tremendous amount of growth in this market in a relatively short amount of time. Now, of course, we all experienced that shift, that what I call a generational shift in our downtowns that occurred in a matter of literally in most cities one day when we had government regulated shutdown. Businesses closed, public health and public safety absolutely hit a pivotal and acute point, those types of crises. And really, you just felt that stark emptying of a downtown that here in Denver naturally had a tremendous amount of density and natural foot traffic. So today, we'll fast forward through those 2 years, right? So where we sit today, we're at about 60% of our weekday office traffic back in the office. Now that is definitely still a bell curve. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, we peak. Mondays and Fridays are still relatively low. What is interesting is on Friday afternoons, though, you start to see the user shift. So our restaurant dining is actually 8% above pre-pandemic levels now. We are nearing 90% of our pre-pandemic visitor traffic with conventions and leisure. And our residential has stayed steady, which I think is true in most cities. Residential has stayed steady all along. And we're even continuing to see growth in residential. In one neighborhood that's immediately adjacent to what we would traditionally think of as the central business district, we have 10,000 units that are coming online in about the next 4 years when you look at what's permitted and what's under construction now. So we all see this shift, right? And where our focus needs to be is downtowns. I'm sure we'll talk about that. Our commercial vacancy is definitely the biggest Achilles heel. 27% in a market that typically was hovering around 11, 12%. This is historic highs for Denver, 27% commercial office vacancy. It is also very like what we're seeing in other cities. It is in that post 1975 to about 2000 office stock that may be a class A minus, maybe a B plus, was already starting to deteriorate pre-pandemic. And then boom, we just had that accelerator pedal hit. And so we're having all those conversations about adaptive reuse. So as we look at moving forward, and then of course, I should note that public health and public safety continues to be a very significant challenge for us. We've made strides, and I would say just the last 6 months, I can talk about where I think we've had successes, but still certainly a very acute focus for everything that we do here at the Downtown Denver Partnership. So as we look forward, we have a few things that I would call catalysts. One, the redo of our 16th Street Mall. So you liken it to obviously Nicollet. We have a $150 million publicly funded project happening, tearing out the mall, rebuilding the infrastructure, and a great opportunity to reposition, in my words, sort of the entirety of the experience and take it out of what it was in 1982, which was lovely for 1982. Now we need it to be true for what the next 40 years will hold for our city. So we're working hard on that. We have a new mayoral administration. Our current mayor has been in office for 12 years. So it is a very significant time of change for our city. We have our mayor-elect, Michael Johnston, who's coming into office in July. So that will mean a lot of change, and we think huge opportunity for us. Infill development, adaptive reuse, the importance of public space. I think those are all very like priorities for us as downtown organizations. So I look forward to talking about those more as we dive into the next set of questions. So thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Courtney. Very familiar topics, but again, a lot of exciting work going on in Denver. So Congratulations.
Thank you.
Andrew, let's go out to the West Coast. How does it look in Portland?
Thank you, Steve, and great lead up, Courtney. I feel like we're all simpatico here, and hello and good morning from the West Coast, 10 a.m. Here out in Portland. And just as mentioned, the Portland Business Alliance is one of those unique entities where we combine both the Regional Chamber of Commerce and also the Downtown Business Improvement District. And I'm sure that this will sound familiar to a lot of folks in the room, but the experience over the past few years has been dramatic. As Courtney mentioned, Pre-pandemic, Portland and specifically its downtown was the belle of the ball. We joked that the crane had become our city's bird, and that was not the actual bird, but in fact, because our skyline was so dotted with construction cranes that we were outpacing some of the larger metropolitan areas like New York and LA back in 2017 and 2018. So we had a huge influx of employee population. Retail vacancy was sub 5%. And so you just had this sense of momentum that the city of Portland and our region had sort of made it to the apex of becoming a major metropolis, and was starting to have those conversations as being an international place of business and a thriving retail core, cultural scene, food scene, et cetera. So that was all leading up into 2020. Of course, we were one of the first in and one of the last outs of the pandemic health closures, so it had significant and overdue consequences. Public health was in priority in our state. We did save lives, but there were consequences clearly. Simultaneously, while Minneapolis was the sort of centerpiece of the challenges and the outcomes after the murder of George Floyd, Portland went a lot longer and a lot deeper and sort of shifted away from a sense of protest to outright political violence. We became a sort of national talking point when it came to the presidential elections. And so there were just layers of significant challenges that we were unequipped and unprepared for. And then on top of that, and while this was not national news, we experienced historic wildfire smoke, historic ice storm closures that just made it feel like there was a sort of doom spiral that was occurring over the past few years. And so if you add on, in addition to that, all the sort of aforementioned challenges around public safety, we saw a significant and dramatic increase in the rise in unsheltered homelessness, a new mixture of sort of lethal cocktails related to meth and fentanyl, where you just created this sort of combustible experience and all of it concentrated in the core. And it really, really, really did hinder our economic outlook. And so, where are we today? And then, lead with the negative and then, shift to the positive. So I'll talk a little bit. I think that in retrospect, last year sort of being the first year out of the pandemic officially for most of us, and Oregon being later out of the pandemic, I don't feel as if we got a complete year last year. Now feels like truly the sort of it's in the rearview mirror. The challenges that were equated with the pandemic closures are all we're not bearing those moving forward. And so overall, we've recovered our visitor count or sort of just general user into the downtown core around 63% pre-pandemic. Our employee count is still dramatically lower. We're around 43% of pre-pandemic employees coming in to use those office buildings that we've talked about. Similarly, in terms of our vacancy rates in the downtown core, somewhere in the ballpark of between 25 and 30%, depending on whether or not you include sublease or underutilized space. And same composite mixture is thriving, and the similar one is challenged. So the Class A office space is actually, I would say, overachieving right now and pushing the boundaries in a good way. Whereas we're seeing those historic buildings, especially for our community, the seismically challenged buildings are struggling right now. Those sort of Class B, Class C buildings are really looking into what we would call the foreclosure wave coming our way. And so that's where we stand right now. Now, looking forward, how I feel is I've never been more optimistic for the political calculation. Our leadership here is truly, at this point, I would call it on the same page. And this is understanding that there's two dynamics we need to be focused on: public safety, homelessness, and quality of life issues. They're focused, they're aligned, they're working together in a collaborative fashion. That's solid. And then simultaneously, the economic levers. There is a understanding and a complete adoption of the fact that without intervention, and we're calling that what it is, intervention, where the public sector is going to intervene in our office core and change the economics of it, we will not have a successful recovery. And so from where I sit today, I feel that those two pillars and foundations, we'll talk a little bit more about that, are totally solidified. I feel like we're headed in the right direction with a lot of good work being done there. And then we're continually getting some really positive momentum that is capturing the sort of national narrative, helping with our reputation recovery side of it. We're opening the largest office building and 5-star hotel, first ever in the city of Portland, with the new Ritz-Carlton happening right here in downtown. This is a hallmark moment. We're seeing new tech companies moving into the downtown core, like Expensify, that were not there before. They're mixing both office use and sort of recreational outdoor food cart, beer hall type developments into our center city. And then a rapid populating of in progress or in permit office to residential conversion where appropriate for housing. So I'm seeing all the right mixtures. So my optimism is pretty high right now, but still in the face of inordinate challenges that I don't think any one of us could have anticipated. So that's the report from Portland.
Terrific. Thank you, Andrew. A lot of encouraging news there, and I really appreciated the stats you sent over the weekend. Very, very impressive. Taylor, Indianapolis, how's it looking from the heartland?
Well, I find it heartening that so many of the things that Andrew and Courtney said are so similar to the experiences that we're having here in Indianapolis. Whether that is the realities of a kind of 3-day work week, or the shifts in demand to evening and weekend, that kind of entertainment crowd that we continue to see enliven our downtown, even as the day-to-day workforce and candidly, business transient traffic continues to be much lower than it had been pre-pandemic. So there are so many similarities to things that have been previously mentioned. Let me offer a little bit of context that maybe is areas in which Indianapolis is perhaps a little unique. Much like my peer cities on this call, 2019 was a record-setting year in terms of visitors, in terms of conventions, in terms of overall tourism impact. But I think in some ways, when you think about our downtown, you really have to go back another 5 or 10 years to understand where downtown was going into the pandemic. I think so much of Indianapolis downtown was built for visitors, and whether that was the people coming in to office towers on a daily basis from the suburbs, or whether that was for sporting events or conventions, that's truly sort of how our downtown was built. And it was built with intentionality for that, but it was really focused on visitors. And about 10 years ago, that shift in our city's thinking to some of the conversations that I'm sure many of us have had around vibrancy, around a sustainable downtown had really started to happen as shifts in office demand changed, as we were seeing more tech companies come into Indianapolis wanting to think differently about office towers that had long served financial or other sort of more traditional office spaces. And as a result, there were buildings being converted really up until the world shut down. We were seeing pretty massive building conversions that were really in the process leading into 2020, only to see them shut down during the height of the pandemic. Our residential population had grown by nearly 50% from 2010 to 2020. And so the shifting dynamics of our downtown, I think both were sort of put on hold when the pandemic occurred, but also have kind of impacted what recovery looks like. And I think some of the challenges now that we are experiencing. In terms of overall foot traffic downtown, in terms of utilization of our downtown, we had a couple of really pivotal things happen during that pandemic timeframe. One is probably the one that you all may be most familiar with, which was the hosting of the entirety of the NCAA tournament here within the Indianapolis bubble. I'll come back to that because while I think it perhaps made the biggest headlines, I think the ways in which it is still being felt in downtown probably had less to do with sports and more to do with public space activation, integration of our arts community in more thoughtful ways, and a broader sense of connectivity with downtown. The other ones were really about how we were thinking about our convention centers differently. and how our civic ecosystem work together in ways that perhaps weren't accustomed to doing prior to the pandemic. We actually stole, as I was writing down notes earlier, it occurred to me that I should make sure of the cities on this call. We stole Sweets and Snacks, a major trade show convention from Chicago, because they were slower, their convention center was slower to reopen than Indianapolis. That was at a smaller capacity and smaller overall footprint, but has led to a broader partnership in future years. That I think there were several examples of that, although Sweets and Snacks was the largest, that our convention center continues to benefit from, that I think has continued to drive both demand, but also a broader understanding among meeting planners of what all Indianapolis's convention ecosystem has to offer. We also really doubled down on youth sports, which was an area that both from a facility standpoint and from a marketing standpoint, Indianapolis had always played in that space. That has really grown as a result of the pandemic. And you're seeing the impact when it comes to first floor retail. There are several spaces that had been empty for some time going into the pandemic that have now opened with the types of things that make sense for girls volleyball tournaments and cheerleading conventions and basketball teams, which has really evolved that district. I think there are folks on my board and others that miss maybe some of the higher end dining options that were there 10 or 15 years ago. And what you're seeing is a much more family focused, entertainment focused, experiential restaurant popping up in that core around the convention center in our downtown that is really reflective of the evolving clientele of those facilities. As I mentioned, hosting the entirety of the NCAA tournament was a massive undertaking with so many partners, but I think one of the things that spun out of it in a very visible way was the reality that downtown Indianapolis has wonderful public spaces that are consistently underutilized. We think of them for big events. We think of them for and everything from something like the NCAA tournament, but also college football national championship and Big Ten tournaments. And we are very intentional with those spaces when we have a bunch of visitors in town, and I think have been less so when we're really thinking about an Indianapolis-based audience. And the tournament, knowing how much of that was kind of a central Indiana-focused population, really started to shift that conversation among partners. And knowing that for Indianapolis, our public spaces are actually managed or owned or operated by really different and diverse groups. How we all work together, regardless of who the people are that are managing it, who the people are that are operating it. Because if I'm a Central Indiana resident, I don't really care. I just want to be able to know that there's something happening in my downtown that is a reason for me to come, is a reason for me to spend more time outside of the singular thing that I might be wanting to do. We continue, I think, like many downtowns, to fight against perception issues. If I've heard it once, I've heard it a million times. Downtown is empty, no one is coming back downtown. And on one hand, to Courtney's point earlier, we continue to see less population in our office towers, even on streets, on Mondays and Fridays than we do Tuesday through Thursday. And even that is a far different feel than we felt pre-pandemic. With that said, I think there are also some positives that I would point to. We've had major companies, including Salesforce, including Cummins, including Lilly, that have really done a push to bring people back into the office with more consistency. We do an annual event as part of the Indy 500 month of May experience, where we take handlebars, the perhaps bane of every downtown conversation's existence, and race them around Monument Circle. Last year, we had 16 people in our first year back, sort of post-pandemic. This year, we had 32. Those are all companies and corporations, and I think really indicative of companies' desire to both get people back and to utilize the downtown as an amenity for getting them here. While we continue, I think, to see broader partnerships around public space and art integration in our downtown, we still really struggle with first floor retail. That had been a challenge pre-pandemic, and I think that has only kind of been exacerbated post-pandemic. You're seeing nodes of retail that are really in what I would consider the regional center, but outside of the central business district and Mile Square, that are thriving, whereas there's a lot of empty storefronts kind of in this central business district. Two more things, and then I promise I will wrap it up. We like to say that we have about $9 billion in development in the pipeline. Some of that is fully underway, cranes in the air happening. Some of that has been not without some challenges. There was a convention center hotel that was planned pre-pandemic that has had some bumps and snags. It looks like it is fully moving along, but perhaps on the later end of the original timeline that we had imagined. That will be 800 new rooms in a truly one-of-a-kind tower that will go up here in the downtown, offering some additional ability to think about events and how we host in that central convention center area. That will be really exciting. It also means some construction growing pains. At the same time, we're having this sort of really downtown-wide conversation about the future of our mall. Circle Center opened in 1996. I think it probably has thrived against odds, and even this last year had a profitable year, despite the fact that the inside you would be hard-pressed to find much in terms of retail, but because they have really intentionally built out that first floor with restaurants and entertainment venues, it continues to sort of limp along in a way that I think has caused investors and others to be slow to pivot. With that said, we're at a moment where there seems to be broader consensus and broader desire to pivot than we've seen as a community in a long time. And so we are really focused on what that could mean in terms of connectivity, what that could mean in terms of the downtown. And so both of those projects, with the pipeline of ones that are sort of coming out of the ground, we also have ones that we're looking to the future and are impatiently waiting to commence.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you, Teal. That was a great update. And I mean, it's clear to me there's some cross-cutting issues all downtowns are dealing with them. There's some kind of unique circumstances that we all have in our cities, in our downtowns. And then there are probably these kind of fairly durable new realities that we need to adjust to, which kind of brings me to the second broad topic that I'd like to ask each of you to comment on. And that is, looking out to the future, either what you're doing now or what you're thinking about doing, or advice from the past. As I mentioned, we're going to kick off I'll look out to 2035 here pretty soon. And as I said to you all in my email, I'm looking to shamelessly steal ideas and inspiration and sort of the people that are listening in today. So any thoughts you have about sort of that future orientation from where we are now, these last 3 years we've all been through, looking to the future, we'd really love to hear that. Maybe we'll go in the same order here. So Courtney, if you wouldn't mind kind of kicking off that conversation. And as Kai indicated, if you've got questions, audience, please put them in the Q&A. We'll try to get to them if we can at the end. But Courtney, what advice do you have for us?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about advice, but I'll certainly share, again, commiserating our experiences. I think as these placemaking, downtown management, however you define our little niche, unique industry, we have been in such this unique position because we typically are able to both operate in the near term and the long term. We have on the ground services, and we're thinking about what comes next. And in the last 3 years, I think we have had to focus so wholly on the today that we're just now all opening our eyes again to what are those mid and long term, while at the same time, none of us can walk away from the fact that we still are at a crisis moment in many sectors of our downtown. So, when I was because my first experience through the pandemic was in Dallas, I'll kind of start with that and then lead into where we are today. So in Dallas, we set forth, I am a planner, not by training, but by experience. And so I have particular passion in the principles of planning. So I mobilized my team there very quickly. And within the first 90 days, we had a 180-page recovery plan fully drafted. As did many. I mean, that's what we do, right? We're problem solvers at the end of the day. So working with our board, working with our members, working with our downtown residents and our neighborhood organizations, we very quickly pivoted into what looked like a typical downtown plan that had a trajectory of 6 months of implementation. And that really served as our backbone. And just before I left, the organization really started looking at, okay, now what does the next iteration of our full comprehensive downtown plan look like? Here in Denver, we did something pretty similar when I got here. We had an initiative called 30 Days to Safer, Brighter Streets that was very tactical, very much what can we do to make a visible difference in the environment every day? And that crossed from, again, with this mantra of beautiful, safe, and active streets. It was what we could do immediately to make a difference there. So like you, Steve, we are now gearing up for an update to our area plan. And here in Denver, we have a very prescriptive process for our neighborhood plans. So the downtown Denver area plan that we are operating within right now dates back to 2007. So that was one of my first initiatives, to make friends with our community planning and development department and say, we can't wait until 2027 for a variety of reasons. In 2019, we couldn't wait until 2027, much less after what we experienced in the last 3 years. So what that looks like for us at this moment in time, because we are in the middle of an administrative change, we have a strong mayor system. So all of our department heads are mayoral appointees. So we have decided that we're going to wait for the new administration to get fully get to rolling in their positions. In the meantime, I'm a huge believer of very strong public-private partnerships in your downtown plans. So the way I see it is that we're mobilizing on the private sector side to set a framework and set our goals so that when the new administration is in place, we can certainly give them something to buy into, but something to jump off from. So the way that I've run planning for the majority of my career is you have these downtown plans that are comprised of a steering committee, and you have the downtown organization and the city manager, whomever the right person is on the public sector, as your chairs. And then your steering committee is made up of all of the different municipal departments as well as private sector experts. I'm a huge believer in community engagement. And I think as a downtown organization, that's a sweet spot for many of us to play. We are the conveners of the community. So allowing my mantra has kind of been, if you convene the community in the right way, then the plan tends to write itself. And while we love all of our consultant friends, I have many, helping to steer and facilitate that conversation and bring the technicalities to it is certainly important, but the community will set the vision. The community will set what the key pillars are to move forward. And I think there's no more important time in our history that our downtown organization is leading a planning effort than where we are right now with these huge generational questions of what the future of downtown is. So I'll kind of leave it at that broad brush stroke, and then can certainly dig in deeper into what elements of the plans I think are important now, but I'll leave that for some Q&A.
That's great. I thank you for that advice, especially that combination of public-private involvement. That's so critical. And what we found is that there's a real hunger to kind of dive into this. I sometimes joke that sometimes that hunger to have your say about this is expressed in somewhat aggressive ways, but it's sort of a glass half full phenomenon. I think a lot of people care about, I think, how all of our downtowns are going to do, and we just need to harness that. So
Yep.
Thanks. Andrew, how about Portland? What are you looking at?
Yeah, well, a lot. And I'll just say one thing I really want to point out to what Courtney said here, and just maybe dial out the aperture. The downtowns have never, this is just my perspective, been in a place to leverage their interests more than now. And I think it's because all downtowns were taken for granted pre-pandemic. It's like, okay, they're thriving, they're growing, they're expanding. People are coming there, economic vitality. And now we see what cities look like without thriving centers, and it is in unacceptable condition. And so I think right now, just doubling on what Courtney said, This is that moment, and we have to take advantage of it. And so the question sort of you led off with, Steve, I have to say, and I get the benefit of being both the regional chamber and the downtown organization. The keystone to everything, and we can just be very impolite here, is politics. And whether we want to accept that or not, electoral success will dictate whether all of our good ideas result in action and implementation execution. And I say that the benefit of coming here, literally, actually, this is my 5-year and 2-day anniversary. The politics in Portland, when I arrived at our city and county level, which are the most basic and determining factors of whether or not we will have supportive, city and county rules, ordinances, regulations, and investments, are dictated by the outcomes of election. And in 2018, it was toxic. It was antithetical. It was, in fact, I would go so far as to say, in opposition to the success of downtown, if not using downtown as a punching bag for political overtones. So we got to work, and I'm not saying we're done, but our electoral efforts over the past 5 years have been methodical, consistent, and produced results. And I'll point out our last election here, we had a primary in May. We got a board member elected to the county commission. We had a board member appointed to lead our homeless services office here in the region. And then we defeated a new tax proposal in Portland, Oregon, 80% to 20%. That is a outright crushing. And that's a message. I'm not saying that to just self-promote, but you don't get those sort of electoral victories on accident. It takes collaboration, time, effort, energy, money. And those things we've laid the groundwork with over the past 5 years, and it's bearing fruit now. So I want to point out some of the 3 key things in terms of the outlook of where we are, the road we're headed on, and where I want to take the organization, especially around downtown issues. And it revolves around homelessness, public safety, and economic development. For those of you unaware, here on the West Coast, we're under the auspice of a 9th Circuit Court ruling on homelessness called Martin v. Boise that effectively says that if you do not have a place to send someone, such as a shelter or temporary housing, that you cannot enforce your present city code related to sidewalk and street camping. And so all of us are under that dictate, and effectively removes a municipality's right to regulated sidewalk activities. And many of us may say, oh, that's a problem, but we've sort of gotten to work on saying, okay, if that's the codified result of a 9th Circuit Court ruling, which was challenged up to the Supreme Court, but did not hear it, then what do we do to meet those standards? And so I'm going to jump right into it. But last year, when we had our gubernatorial election here in Oregon, homelessness played the defining factor. And in October, the city of Portland brought 5 resolutions that put the city, which includes downtown, on a 1.5-year plan, 18 months, to end unsanctioned camping in the city by doing the things we all know that need to happen. Produce more housing, of course, create enough adequate shelter space to meet the Martin v. Boise criteria, and then to make sure that there were enough services within shelter capacity to meet chemical addiction, mental health, and other substance abuse needs. So that was announced and voted on in the middle of the elections. All the gubernatorial candidates endorsed it. All of our county chair candidates endorsed that plan. And so that's where we are. We're on that roadmap towards ending unsanctioned camping by producing enough shelter space. And this is so acute for the downtown area. And so the question is, how do we get from that point in time, from when we are producing shelter space, adding capacity to the point we meet Martin v. Boise standards, and that future point that we're all looking towards, what we do in the intervening period of time? And so there are huge consequences about what happens now. And so the city and county have gone on overdrive in terms of adding more law enforcement, accountable public safety officers in our downtown core. Our district attorney's office has stood up some things that I think are so crucial. One, a focused prosecuting unit on retail theft and auto theft, because we know those are sort of gateway crimes that both impact our downtown cores as well as create other crimes. Everyone who's committing a crime in a car is committing one in a stolen car. So it's just, these are the sort of linchpin crimes that, you know, if you can bring those down, you create an overall sense of public safety. And then we've had an inordinate condition of the outbreak of just toxic drugs. I talked about this earlier. And so right now, two things are happening. Simultaneously, over the last 2 weeks, the mayor's office and city council introduced a time, place, manning camping ordinance in the city of Portland. There is no daytime camping that will be allowed starting on July 1st. You can, yes, camp because that is permitted because Martin v. Boise has not been met, but you cannot do it in the daytime. Then secondly, we're seeing the introduction this week, it was announced at our annual meeting last week, of a ban on all drug use, open drug use in the city of Portland. So yes, we have a decriminalization of some of these more significant drugs in effect. It's state law, but you cannot use drugs in the middle of the day anymore. That is no longer permissible. It's same sort of construct as open container laws that you might see around anywhere else. These are common sense regulations. We just did not have those in place. So if you look at this, adding shelter capacity rapidly, having time, place, manner ordinances for camping in the city of Portland until we get there, and having really significant investments in public safety, we're building the base and the foundation for a successful downtown quality of life experience. And then on the economic development front, this stuff is where I'm just most excited about. So this all got rolled out last week in coordination with the city and the county. Again, people that we've worked very, very hard to collaborate with and to support their elections. We were able to witness the rollout of an expanded and defined Central City Urban Renewal Zone, the establishment of a Central City Tax Incremental Financing District, the starting conversation for the expansion of our downtown business improvement district, the expansion of our enterprise zone. I saw a question in that Q&A function about this is property tax abatement for various development activities within our core. And then lastly, this one is the one where I think is what's going to be that intervention that I talked about at the beginning. We have something called the business license tax. That's our business tax for the city. And so the mayor's office is proposing a 5-year business tax credit complete abatement if you sign a lease in downtown over the next 6 to 7 months. So leading up to basically the end of the year, a 5-year abatement for any lease signed, provided you're bringing your employees back at least 3 days a week into the office. And so if there's a company who's on the edge, they'll think about, oh, I need to maybe sign here, I got to go to the suburbs. Okay, guess what? You're not paying taxes for the next 5 years in Portland. So if you think about the composite nature of enterprise zone expansion, business license tax credit, all of this put together along with our public safety investments and a march towards the end of unsheltered camping in the city, that's the journey we're on, and it's a good one. So that's what we're looking forward to, and we think it all plays a good positive role in supporting our recovery.
Terrific. Yeah, elections indeed have consequences, and it sounds like yours are moving in the right direction. So congrats. We could trade war stories about independent election committees and things of that sort, but congrats. Taylor, what wisdom do you have for us?
Well, I feel like I have to offer a couple of caveats. First one is this is our 30th anniversary. We were incorporated 30 years ago this year. And we, I believe, are the only entity on here that does not have some sort of taxing mechanism associated with it. We don't have an EID, we don't have a BID, we don't have whichever letters your municipality uses, we don't have that associated with us. We are a membership-based organization that works much like a chamber of commerce, but has long been contracted with the city on a sort of ad hoc basis. I think that goes back to the focus on downtown around events and seasonality, as opposed to thinking about downtown as a 365-day place. The other caveat that I would offer is that I actually came from the city. I had previously been Mayor Hochstadt's chief of staff for the last 2 years and been with the administration since 2016, and have only been in this role about 8 months. So there has been a lot of transition in so many ways here within the organization. And the other thing that you should know from a timing standpoint is that I came in October, and our state legislature operates in a budget year about January through April. So that's sort of the timeline and context for which I'm going to offer a couple of additional thoughts One is about December of last year, the city committed $3.5 million for from federal ARPA funding for sustained, consistent downtown operations over an 18-month window. That was an attempt to do a couple of things. That was to provide some proof of concept for what 365-day operations look like. That is a drastic expansion of our street ambassador program. That is additional capacity for our bike and foot patrols utilizing off-duty IMPD officers. And that is additional staffing in partnership with service providers focused on our homeless population. That then went into a session at the General Assembly where we, City of Indianapolis, State of Indiana, and other municipalities have worked for the last 2 years on what was called a low barrier task force. Indianapolis is one of the largest municipalities in the country that has neither a municipally run shelter or any sort of low barrier shelter options. We have several shelter systems here in central Indiana, but all of them are considered a high barrier. That task force has really worked for the last 2 years in many ways because of the acceleration of factors around homelessness, the visibility of homeless throughout the early stages of the pandemic, and has worked very closely together to come up with a series of recommendations, both at the local level and the state level. As part of last year's budget, the City of Indianapolis committed about $12 million to the construction of a low barrier shelter and I think housing navigation facility, trying to take that one step past just a low barrier shelter to that more transitional housing and one-stop access point for a variety of services. But we're looking to the state then for additional partnership with that. Here in Indiana, we have Indianapolis is sort of a dot of blue, sometimes purple, in a pretty sea of red everywhere else. And while sometimes that can take the form of sort of urban, suburban versus rural divide, this was really kind of the one issue where everyone sort of linked arms to say, we need a solution. And the nice part of the way that the low barrier task force was constructed is that it was chaired by an appointee of the governor, an appointee of the mayor. It had local and state representation, and then it had statewide representation. So it really wasn't just central Indiana fighting with the rest of the state, but it really was this sort of movement of, okay, let's address some of the challenges in Indianapolis, and then let's see how those policy decisions, those funding mechanisms, and the overall viewpoint can impact issues that are being felt throughout the rest of the state. That really, really hard work went into moving that forward, and ended up coming in the form of a $20 million line item within our biennium budget for the construction of a low barrier shelter here in Marion County. It also, about 72 hours before sine die, included new language in the budget bill for a different mechanism than an EID. There are areas in Indiana that have EIDs, cities that have implemented them very effectively. It has continually been a challenge here in downtown Indianapolis. From the time that we were incorporated in '93, the mayor at the time envisioned there being that partnership and funding mechanism that would come alongside of our organization. There have been, I believe, 4 in total movements to try to create one, and all 4 have been unsuccessful. The last one, in large part due to a really robust lobbying effort from the apartment association. They have long had kind of an outsized presence here in Indianapolis and across the state, and really actively lobbied against it. The language that ended up in House Bill 1001 was open-ended and creative. I think I've said the term framework to more reporters in the last 6 weeks than they would ever like for me to. It provides the ability for the city county council with a direct vote to create a funding mechanism that would then be city and state run. It would have 4 appointments from the city, 4 appointments from the state, 2 governor, 2 mayor, 1 House, 1 Senate, and 2 council, that would then assess a tax that could be used not just for downtown operations like a traditional EID, but could also help to provide a sustainable funding source for the low barrier shelter, with the idea that increased revenue would alleviate some of the burden on the city's general fund. That came together incredibly quickly, and I think that right now there's a lot of conversation about how do you pull together all of these pieces. The other thing that's unique about Indiana is that we are an off-year municipal election, so mayors and councils are being elected in Indiana all across the state this year. So you have sort of the timeline and pressure of that tool, and the reality is that if it is not implemented by next session, it becomes kind of an open question on what happens. At the same time, you have elected officials on the ballot. As I said, the nice part is that the $3.5 million of federal funding was with the intention of an 18-month implementation window. That has been our primary focus over the last several months of what it looks like to scale our operations in a way that we as an organization never have before. What does it look like to really be thinking about the entirety of the mile square as opposed to the wholesale district, or what I might call the convention and entertainment district? And then what does it look like to plan for the future and kind of prove our case, knowing that this tool may only be on the books for a relatively limited amount of time. And how do you bring all of those pieces together? We are also, see, this is the last thing I'll say, we are also in the process of going through a strategic plan. We've never done that before because our creation was so closely tied to the mayor's office. There's always sort of, I think, been the view that we were responsive to city government, that we were responsive to those market forces and where our membership dollars were coming from. And I don't know that we've ever really taken the opportunity to set that vision for ourselves. So the combination of me coming in, I think offered a moment of self-reflection for the board. As a longtime leader, exited the organization to think about where there were gaps, where there was work that was being done that was either duplicative of other organizations or just overlapping in unproductive ways. And I think kind of open dialogue with a variety of partners. I was also really lucky to be walking out of a situation where I was working with so many of these same civic organizations that then jumping into a strategic planning process, we've really focused on one-on-one conversations. We've really focused on re-engaging the board and our civic ecosystem of partners to think about how downtown Indy fits in to the sustainability, to the viability, to the beautification, to the safety of downtown. And in some ways, an education process for what our peer organizations are doing, what it means to be more outcome driven, what it means to be more operationally driven, and not just a convener or a unified voice, to be able to address some of the immediacy of the challenges that downtown is facing, that I think all of us in some way or another have mentioned, whether that's public safety, whether that's dealing with issues around homelessness and aggressive panhandling, but also what does it look like to ensure that we love saying that downtown Indianapolis is the fastest growing neighborhood. I think we've said it for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years running, but I don't know that elected officials or really even our downtown ecosystem has always treated it that way. It's nice that there are people living in those apartment towers, but they're probably going to move when they get married or have kids or figure out where they want to buy a house. And so there's never been the type of investment or strategy to follow what it looks like to make it a true neighborhood. And I think all of those pieces are both coming together and sort of up in the air at this moment in time. And that's what we hope to be able to really address with some broad buy-in for our strategic plan.
Well, it sounds like a perfect set of circumstances for you to do that first strategic plan. So good luck to you. Yeah, we've got a lot of good questions, most of which we can't get to, but I would like to maybe play off of Taylor's last comment and ask each of you to reflect a little bit about how kind of business organizations that have been centered around commerce, kind of thinking ahead and the nature of our changing downtowns and the priority that we all put on trying to grow our residential populations. How do you all think about that outreach and connectivity to residential populations that are part of your neighborhoods? And Courtney, could you maybe start with a quick answer to that, and then we'll go to Andrew and back to Taylor, and that's probably all the time we'll have.
Yeah. I mean, I think just fundamentally, it's absolutely paramount. I'm incredibly lucky to be leading a downtown organization as someone who lived downtown in both Dallas and now here for the majority of my life, including raising 2 kids. So I have a particular perspective on that. I often say, and here in Denver, we have had, from a political standpoint, Andrew, to your point, everything comes down to politics, right? And you saw very much in our most recent local election, I'm either the neighborhood candidate or I'm the business community candidate. And the partnership, this organization that I inherited, was fundamentally known, perception, whether right or wrong, as a business only organization. So I've worked really hard in the last year and a half to shift that and to really reiterate the point that community and business, neighborhoods and business, are not mutually exclusive. And in fact, they are absolutely symbiotic pieces of the puzzle that are necessary to one another. And if you have a thriving community and a thriving neighborhood, then you're going to have thriving businesses and vice versa. So we are working very closely now with our neighborhood organization. Denver has a tradition of very strong RNOs. We have great leadership there. We are working together. We just launched, and I'll give you this example and then zip it because I know we're limited on time, but we launched a very significant public safety initiative called Together We Will, with over 40 partnered agencies in that. And that was from law enforcement, district attorney, U.S. Attorney General, on and on and on and on. And those RNOs were absolutely key in the planning of that initiative, as well as the advocacy of that initiative. And so we are now more than 80 partner organizations strong in that initiative, meeting regularly, talking about the issues, real talk, how we can all work together. And it's been tremendously impactful to see the business community in our neighborhoods coming together.
Correct. Thanks for that. And Andrew, how about you?
Yeah, so I actually think, right outside of our central core is a neighborhood called Slabtown, and Slabtown's office vacancy is effectively zero, and its retail vacancy is effectively zero, and it happens to also be almost an equal split of residential and office in that neighborhood. And so when we think of the neighborhood of the future for downtown, maybe we're not going to get to that. That's where we want to go. So a lot of the policies we're working on the day-to-day is to residentialize our central city core, because we think it makes the office, the commercial real estate, vastly more attractive and valuable, because who doesn't want to wake up and walk across the street to their office? I don't know, maybe that's not a thing, but I think it is a thing. Anyway, so I think there's that piece of it. And then just what Courtney made the point out, I think that it strengthens the business community's voice to have its complement on the residential side, because who cares more for space than someone who lives there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? I think downtowns get a little bit of a pile on oftentimes because they don't have those defenders of people who say, that's my home. And so I think if you're talking who's the right messenger, creating a much greater residential mix in our cores is absolutely necessary for a better future for downtowns, and also a lot stronger voice in the political arena.
Taylor, I think both of our heads were shaking a lot as Courtney and Andrew were talking. So what would you add to that?
I would say that, like Courtney, I am a downtown resident. I purchased my house with the intention of continuing to be able to have the connectivity, the flexibility, the amenities of downtown as I moved out of an apartment that was also in the same sort of general area. It's where I chose to put down roots, which is part of what was so appealing to me about this role. I think our board has had a similar trajectory of 30 years ago. I would hazard to guess that not only did no one live downtown, but you probably had a shocking number who didn't live in Marion County. And increasingly, the board mix has really helped to lead the way in thinking differently about the stakeholders of what it means for our organization to represent downtown, what it means for us not to just be a corporate organization, but instead one that is really representative of the mix of people who call downtown home. And I think that continuing, it's funny, I go into a room and I talk about how we do our very best to make sure the house looks clean and everything is polished, and we put on our best face for when we have guests in town, but we don't treat it with the same care for the people who live here. And it's amazing to me how many head nods I get in that room, because I think that historically, over the last couple of years, we've loved talking about how we're bringing people back downtown. And the truth is that both for the residential population here within the Miles Square, but also all of the contiguous historic neighborhoods that are immediately adjacent, they've called downtown home. And whether they are Holy Cross residents or Old South Side residents, they consider themselves part of the downtown community. And I think by both ensuring that they have a role in our organization and that we are being supportive. This weekend, a team from downtown Indy went and participated in an adjacent neighborhoods community cleanup. That isn't necessarily tied to our day-to-day operations, but we understand, to Andrew's point, that they are our biggest cheerleaders when it comes to the vibrancy of downtown, when it comes to fighting back against negative perceptions, when it comes to the livability of the area. And they are the ones that have been supporting local businesses since the moment that they reopened. And they were the ones going and getting carry out the moment that they could do that in order to ensure that their local bar, their local restaurant could continue to survive. And we need to be that support system for them too. And I think that has been a real mindset shift that the board has helped to lead as well.
It's great. I could talk to you guys all day, but we are at our appointed hour here. So again, thank you so much for taking the time, offering your insights, great information for us as we kind of move forward here in Minneapolis. And I just wish all of you the best of luck in your communities as you move forward in these future years. So, and thanks everyone for tuning in today, and we'll call it a wrap. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.